April 1241. Sajo River, Hungary. The Hungarian knights are in the middle of a battle. Swords drawn, the smell of smoke and blood saturating the cold morning air. And then, before their very eyes, the enemy begins to fall back. Slowly at first, then faster. And then you see something you never expected to see. An opening, a gap in the enemy line. A space between their squadrons. Wide, visible, almost inviting. The Mongols are fleeing. These are the same warriors who had destroyed China, devoured the Middle East, and swept across the Russian steppes without losing a single pitched battle in decades. The same ones who had made entire empires surrender before the first arrow was fired, the horsemen of the apocalypse. And now they were giving ground, opening gaps in their ranks, retreating before the Hungarian army. This is not the story you think you know. The Hungarian knights spurred forward. The ground flew past beneath the hooves. The breach was drawing closer. The battle was won. And everything was about to be justified in that moment of glorious pursuit. But there was something they didn't know. That opening was not a weakness. That retreat was not a rout. And the battle was not won. It was about to truly begin. When the Hungarian warriors crossed that open space, they were not chasing a collapsing army. They were walking into an ambush that had taken 20 years to build. A trap engineered with enough precision to make trained soldiers, with numerical advantage on defensible ground, taste victory at the exact moment they were being destroyed. This is the story of the Battle of Mohi, of the most elaborate ambush of the Middle Ages, and of the question that haunted the few survivors for the rest of their lives. How did experienced soldiers, in the midst of real combat, mistake a deadly trap for a victory? The answer will change what you think about how wars are really decided. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. To understand why Mohi was possible, you first need to understand what the Hungarians were up against. And to understand that, you need to understand what the Mongols were in 1241. In 1241, the Mongol army was the most formidable military force the world had seen since the Roman Empire. And in many respects, it was even more devastating. Ever since Genghis Khan unified the steppe tribes in the early 13th century, the Mongols had built something unique in history. A war machine that combined speed, collective discipline, and tactical innovation in a proportion no adversary could match. They were not merely cavalry. They were siege engineers who learned from every city they conquered. They were strategists who coordinated armies separated by hundreds of miles. They were, above all, psychologists of war. Men who understood exactly how to make an enemy behave the way they wanted. And their track record was flawless. From China to the Middle East, from the Russian steppes to the plains of Persia, wherever the Mongols appeared, empires crumbled. Cities that resisted were destroyed so systematically and so thoroughly that the destruction itself became a tool. The message was clear: resist and be annihilated, submit and be dominated. The pattern was so consistent that the Mongols' reputation preceded their armies, breaking resistance before the first arrow was fired. When Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, leader of the Golden Horde, and his general Subutai began planning the invasion of Central Europe in 1241, they arrived with a meticulously structured plan, built on intelligence gathered over years, designed to eliminate all organized European resistance before it could consolidate. And the plan had one element no one in Europe saw coming. The Mongols were not invading Hungary. They were invading Europe, simultaneously, on two fronts, with two separate armies operating in perfect coordination across hundreds of miles of enemy territory. While Batu Khan led the main force directly into the heart of Hungary, a second Mongol army advanced from the northwest, cutting straight through Poland and Silesia. The objective of that second army was not to conquer Poland. It was to eliminate any Polish, German, or Bohemian force that might flank or reinforce the Hungarians while the main battle unfolded. It was a chess move played on a board the size of a continent. And the Europeans didn't know there were two players. European intelligence on the Mongols was fragmented, imprecise, and profoundly inadequate. No European army had survived a prolonged encounter with the Mongols to report back on how they actually fought. Those who tried to resist were annihilated too quickly to leave behind any detailed analysis. And so Bela IV, the king of Hungary, knew the Mongols were dangerous. What he did not know was just how elaborate the web being woven around him truly was. Bela IV, king of Hungary since 1235, was neither a coward nor a fool. He had spent years fighting to reform a divided kingdom, resisting his own nobility as much as any foreign invader. He was a man who had made hard choices, who had forged alliances where he could, who genuinely believed he had prepared his kingdom for what was coming. In that week before the battle, he most likely thought he had done everything right. When reports arrived that the Mongols were advancing, he mobilized his army, summoned his nobles, chose defensible ground, and positioned himself to resist. His choice was the Sajo River in northeastern Hungary, a natural barrier with only a few bridges controlling the crossings, a place where Hungarian numbers could be used effectively. Bela established a fortified camp on the western bank of the Sajo. Tents, wagons, stakes. The camp was vast, organized, defended along its perimeter. His knights were there. The bishops and clergy who had answered the call were there. The kingdom's military power was concentrated at a single point, ready for battle. Estimates placed the total between 60,000 and 100,000 combatants, a considerable force, in a defensive position, with a natural obstacle covering one flank. There was something military historians call the logic of force concentration, the intuition that gathering all your power at a single point creates an overwhelming advantage. In most medieval European conflicts, this logic worked. Numbers created pressure. Sustained pressure won battles. But this logic carries a built-in assumption that is rarely articulated, that the enemy will fight the way you expect them to fight. Bela had numerical superiority. He had defensible terrain. He had a natural barrier protecting his flank, and he was prepared for the battle he imagined he would fight. Two armies clashing in an open field, the larger and more determined side pushing the other off the field. What Bela was not prepared for was a battle that had been decided before it even began. And while he prepared, secure in his camp on the western bank of the Sajo River, the trap was being set piece by piece. But before we reach that decisive night, we need to talk about something that happened 2 days earlier, 60 kilometers to the north, in a field called Legnica. Because what happened at Legnica was not a prelude. It was the same script, the same trick, executed with such precision that it utterly destroyed the finest of European cavalry in less than an hour. And the Hungarians never knew. The dress rehearsal was perfect, and the main audience never received the warning. 2 days. Only 2 days separated the two greatest battles Europe would face that century. On April 9, 1241, while Bela IV was still positioning his men along the banks of the Sajo, a Polish prince named Henry II of Silesia, the Pious, was assembling his forces near Legnica in western Poland. Henry had an army any medieval general would have envied. Polish knights, German knights of the Teutonic Order, Templars, the cream of Central European chivalry. Estimates place the total between 20,000 and 30,000 warriors, highly trained, disciplined men, motivated by faith and duty, equipped with the finest armor and weaponry Western Europe produced. They were about to face something for which they had absolutely no tactical frame of reference. The Mongol army that confronted Henry at Legnica was not the main force. It was a diversionary force, designed specifically to prevent reinforcements from any direction from reaching Bela IV in Hungary. In terms of the Mongol strategic plan, Legnica was a supporting move, a secondary piece on a larger board. For those who fought and died there was absolutely nothing secondary about it. The battle began as Henry expected. The lines engaged. Cavalry made contact. And then something strange happened. Something no European knight in that coalition had ever encountered before. A dense curtain of smoke, generated by incendiary devices the Mongols carried specifically to create tactical chaos, began spreading across the battlefield. Visibility dropped to mere meters. Lines of communication between units broke down. Commanders lost sight of what was happening beyond a few horse lengths in any direction. And in that haze of chaos and visual confusion, the Mongol warriors began to withdraw. Slowly, visibly, in a way that looked genuinely panicked, like men who had gotten into a fight that was going badly and needed to create space to regroup. Henry's knights saw what appeared to be an opportunity, enemies losing cohesion, a moment to press the pressure before they could rally, and they did what medieval knights were trained to do. They charged. The heavy cavalry, the decisive force of Henry's army, gave chase. They advanced rapidly. They pulled away from the infantry. They separated from the rest of the formation in pursuit of the enemy's retreat, and they rode into open ground where Mongol horse archers had all the room they needed to operate. What happened next was brutal and swift. The Mongol archers turned. Arrows rained down upon compacted cavalry that had advanced too far to retreat effectively. The warriors who had appeared to be fleeing simply stopped, wheeled their horses, and came back over the pursuers with all the speed the pursuit had generated. The flanks closed in. Henry II of Silesia was killed on that field. His army was destroyed. And here is what makes Legnica even more disturbing in retrospect. This outcome was not the work of chance. It was the precise execution of a strategic objective. The Mongols did not come to Poland by accident. They came to surgically remove the only army that could have come to Bela IV's aid. The two-front coordination that seemed impossible at a continental scale was working exactly as Subutai had designed. Isolate the primary target before closing the encirclement. And Bela IV, camped 60 kilometers away, received no message about what had happened at Legnica. No survivor arrived in time. No warning pierced the strategic silence the Mongols had created around their operations. The trap that had just killed a prince and destroyed an entire army was about to be set again, with refinements, 2 days later. Bela IV was completely in the dark. He did not know what had happened at Legnica. He did not know what was about to happen at the Sajo. The night of April 10th, 1241 should have been a night of tense but controlled vigilance. The Hungarian camp on the Sajo River was established, defended along its perimeter, and well manned. Guards had been posted at designated positions. Sentries patrolled the approaches. Knights and soldiers slept the heavy sleep of men who had marched far and knew the decisive battle was very close. Inside the camp, the embers were cooling. Someone dozed leaning against a wagon. Not a single sentry stirred. On the other side of the Sajo, Subutai was moving. Subutai was the architect of the invasion. Not merely a field commander, though he was exceptional at that as well, but a strategist of surgical precision who had helped plan and execute campaigns since the earliest conquests of Genghis Khan. It was Subutai who saw the battlefield not as it was in the present, but as it would be when the right pieces were in the right positions. There was the main bridge over the Sajo River, known, watched, with Hungarian sentries in position. And there was something else, a secondary crossing point, further south, less obvious, less protected. The secret was not in Subutai's warriors. It was in the terrain. It was in the river the Hungarians used as protection, and that Subutai used as a passage. In the darkness of April 10th, Subutai led his force, tens of thousands of warriors, across that secondary crossing, with the silence of a rehearsed operation, without alarm, without fire. The largest nighttime troop movement of the campaign unfolded in complete anonymity. At the same time, Batu Khan commanded a direct operation at the main bridge. The Hungarian sentries guarding it were killed or driven off before they could send any meaningful warning to the camp. The bridge was taken. When the sun rose on April 11th, 1241, the strategic situation had changed completely during the hours of darkness. The Mongols were no longer waiting in an opposing position. They were in positions covering multiple angles of approach to the Hungarian camp. The main crossing was under their control. Subutai's force was positioned to the south, ready for what was to come. The Hungarian army, numerous, well-equipped, in a fortified position, was structurally compromised before the battle even began. They did not yet know this, but by every relevant strategic measure, the Battle of April 11th had been partially decided in the darkness of April 10th. The morning of April 11th, 1241 began the way Bela IV had envisioned. The Hungarian army formed up. The cavalry took position, Batu Khan's forces were visible on the other side of the river, and the fighting began. Frontal clash, mutual pressure, the deafening roar of cavalry and collision that marked the opening of every great medieval battle. The Mongols fought. They held. And then, slowly, in a way that seemed organic, almost inevitable, they began to yield ground. First, one step back, then two. The Hungarian line advanced, the pressure mounted, and the Mongols kept retreating, not in a rout, nothing as obvious as that, but in a gradual contraction, like men being pushed back, like an army that had miscalculated the resistance it would face. To Bela Fafur and his commanders, it looked exactly like what they expected, an enemy meeting determined resistance, losing cohesion, beginning to show signs of strain. Manageable, readable, promising. And then came the thing that sealed a kingdom's fate, the gap. It was not a random flaw in the line. It was not the collapse of an overextended unit. It was a space, wide, visible, clearly defined, that had opened in the center of the Mongol formation. An opening between the squadrons that had been there too long to be ignored, too large to be accidental. The Hungarians saw it and understood immediately. The enemy was fragmenting. That space was where their line had broken apart. Cavalry charging through that gap could flank the Mongol forces, split the army in two, turn an already unfolding retreat into a complete defeat. It was an opportunity. It was the decisive moment of a battle that was clearly heading in the right direction. And it was entirely fabricated. That space had not opened by accident. That retreat was not flight. Every meter the Mongol warriors had yielded had been calculated. The gap was bait, designed by Subutai to be precisely attractive enough to make a Hungarian commander commit the mistake that would destroy his army. Not so obvious as to appear a trap. Not so closed as to appear inaccessible. Perfect, inviting, inevitable. The best traps never look like traps. They look like opportunities. The Hungarian cavalry charged. When the Hungarian knights rode through the opening, they carried with them all the confidence of men who believe they have seen the turning point of a battle. And for a few seconds, perhaps an entire minute, that confidence was fed. The Mongol warriors at the front kept falling back. The pursuit seemed to be working. Then everything changed at once. From the south, from the secondary crossing Subutai had used silently in the darkness of the previous night, thousands of mounted warriors emerged. For a Hungarian knight inside the gap, in that instant, the south simply ceased to exist as a direction of escape. Subutai's flanking force closed on the flank with all the speed that an entire night of positioning had guaranteed. They came fast. They came in numbers that made immediate resistance impossible, and the Mongol warriors who had been retreating, the ones the Hungarians were pursuing, turned around. It was not disorderly. It was not chaotic. It was precise, like the closing of a mechanism that had been designed to do exactly that at exactly that moment. The cavalry that had appeared to be withdrawing simply stopped, wheeled their horses, and bore down on their pursuers with all the speed that the pursuit itself had generated. The gap closed, not gradually. Within minutes, the open space through which the Hungarian cavalry had charged was filled with Mongol warriors. The men who had advanced were now cut off from the rest of the army, surrounded, severed from any line of resupply, reinforcement, or retreat. Every turn of a horse met more warriors. There was no edge of the field to reach. What followed was a methodical annihilation. The Mongols deployed the tools they had refined over decades of campaigning across multiple theaters of operation. Mounted archers fired with lethal precision in circular motion, turning any compact formation into a perfect target. Incendiary projectiles created pockets of fire and smoke that prevented coordinated escape and shattered unit cohesion. The coordinated encirclement turned every attempted breakout into a charge straight into more Mongol warriors. Meanwhile, back at the Hungarian camp, the situation was growing equally desperate. Batu Khan, with the main force, was closing on the defensive position. The wagons and stakes Bela had erected as protection became, in a cruel tactical paradox, prisons. Structures that prevented the Hungarians from dispersing, from maneuvering, from escaping in any organized fashion. Historians estimate more than 100,000 Hungarian deaths on that field. Soldiers, knights, nobles, prelates, the very sum of the kingdom's organized strength. In a few hours on an April morning, the military fabric of an entire nation had been dismantled. Not because the Hungarians were cowards, not because they were poorly trained or poorly led, but because they had been steered, with calculated precision, into a position from which there was no way out, and they did not realize what was happening until it was irreversibly too late. That gap that had looked like a victory was the gateway to the greatest massacre in medieval European military history. Béla IV survived Mohi. That must be said, and equally contextualized. His survival was not a triumph. It was a flight, carried out under circumstances that stripped away any element of glory or agency. While his army was being annihilated, the King of Hungary escaped the encirclement and fled westward. The Mongols sent forces in pursuit, not out of immediate strategic necessity, given that the Hungarian army was already destroyed, but as a demonstration of absolute dominance. Béla fled through Austria. He fled through Dalmatia. He eventually sought refuge on islands in the Adriatic Sea. For months, the monarch of what had been one of the most powerful kingdoms in Central Europe lived as a fugitive, leaping from fortress to fortress while the Mongols controlled the territory of his own realm. And during that period, Hungary was theirs. There was no army to resist. There were no garrisons in sufficient numbers to defend. Cities were sacked, fields were burned. The plains of Hungary, some of the richest and most productive agricultural land in Europe, became Mongol territory through the winter of 1241 to 1242. The estimates of civilian deaths during the occupation are devastating. Historians calculate that Hungary lost up to half of its total population in the combined toll of battle, pillage, famine, and flight. An army of 100,000 men is not merely a military instrument. It is the framework of a society. These are the nobles who administer provinces. These are the knights who keep order on the roads. To destroy that army in a single day was not simply to win a battle. It was to dismantle the human architecture of an entire kingdom. Béla IV would eventually return. He would reign until 1270, rebuild what he could, raise new fortifications in stone. But the Hungary he reclaimed would never be quite what it had been before the morning of April 11th, 1241. And the Mongols left when they chose to leave. In 1242, they withdrew on their own terms, not expelled, not defeated, not stopped by any European force. The most widely accepted theory among historians is that the death of Great Khan Ögedei in December of 1241 required the commanders to return to Mongolia for the election of his successor. They left because they decided to leave. And that distinction, in itself, says everything about the level of control they exercised over the situation from beginning to end. But here is the detail that changes everything. The Mongols did not invent this trick at Mohi. They used it at Mohi, and the first time it is documented, 21 years earlier, thousands of kilometers away. It was equally lethal, equally precise, and equally ignored by those who would later witness the same trick again. Here is the question military historians have been asking for centuries. What was Mohi? Was it brilliant improvisation at a moment of opportunity? Was it luck that the Hungarians made exactly the right mistakes? No. Mohi was the execution of a doctrine, a tactical system developed, tested, and refined over more than 2 decades before being applied in Hungary. The feigned retreat was not a Mongol trick, it was a Mongol weapon. And the oldest account we have of its documented use takes us to 1220, 21 years before Mohi, to a city called Samarkand in Central Asia. Genghis Khan, the unifier of the steppe tribes, was besieging Samarkand. The city was enormous, well fortified, with a considerable garrison prepared to hold out. Attacking the walls directly would be costly. But there was something Genghis Khan understood that the defenders did not understand about the nature of their own position. A garrison inside walls is harmless, but also static. A garrison outside the walls is vulnerable. The problem was getting the garrison to come out. Genghis Khan had his forces advance aggressively, and then retreat convincingly, with the kind of haste that appeared genuine, with the visual signs of disorganization that an experienced commander would interpret as opportunity. And the garrison of Samarkand, seeing what appeared to be a chance to strike disorganized Mongol forces in a moment of weakness, came out from the walls. The estimate is that approximately half the garrison was destroyed in the open field. The pattern had been established, and in the 20 years that followed, it had been practiced, refined, and applied in sufficiently varied contexts that Subutai, in 1241, was not improvising, he was executing. What makes the feigned retreat work is not the maneuver itself. It is the psychology it exploits, and that psychology is deep, universal, and extraordinarily difficult to resist in the heat of a real battle. When you see the enemy retreating, your brain receives a powerful signal. You are winning. That signal does not pass through careful analysis before affecting behavior. It activates something far more primitive, the instinct to capitalize, the urge to pursue, the fear that if you do not act now, the moment will pass. Armies built around heavy cavalry were especially vulnerable to this dynamic. Medieval cavalry was built around the principle of the decisive charge, the idea that the momentum of a compact group of knights was a force few adversaries could withstand. That principle was real and effective in countless contexts. But it made cavalry prone to pursuing, to advancing beyond their support lines, to separating from the main army in pursuit of a victory that seemed just one more spur away. The Mongols did not merely exploit this tendency, they studied it, they provoked it. They deliberately created the conditions, the convincing retreat, the tempting gap in the line that made an adversary act in the very way that would destroy him. It was hunting, systematic, scientific. But there was a crucial technical requirement that made all of this possible: exceptional discipline. A feigned retreat is, in terms of execution, one of the most difficult maneuvers an army can perform. You are asking warriors to turn their backs to the enemy and withdraw, which every combat instinct tells them they must not do. You are asking them to maintain cohesive formation while appearing to be in disarray. You are asking them, at the exact moment determined by the commander, to turn and counterattack with maximum force. Most medieval armies could not do this, not because their soldiers were cowards, but because the discipline required demanded years of training together, absolute trust in the command structure, and a military culture that treated calculated maneuver as a core value. The Mongols had all of this. They had trained together, many of them since childhood. They trusted Subutai not out of fear, but from accumulated evidence that the plan always had a logic that proved correct when executed. And the maneuver was not new to them. They had practiced it at Samarkand, on the Russian steppes, in the Caucasus. Mohi was not where the feigned retreat was invented. It was where it was applied in its most elaborate form, against the greatest available European adversary, as part of a coordinated continental campaign on multiple simultaneous fronts. Mohi was not a stroke of genius. It was the execution of a system. And Europe had no counter-doctrine because no army had survived long enough in a confrontation with the Mongols to develop an effective response. April 1241. The Sajo River. The Hungarian knights see the gap in the Mongol line. They see the enemy retreating. They taste the flavor of imminent victory. And they spur forward. Now you know what they did not know. That gap had been created for them. Every meter of that retreat had been calculated. Subutai's force had crossed the river in silence during the night to be exactly where it needed to be at that moment. And Subutai knew this because he had built and tested that mechanism over 2 decades, at Samarkand, on the Russian steppes, in the Caucasus. The battle the Hungarians believed they were winning had been designed piece by piece to look exactly like this, until the instant when perception shifted, and it was already too late. The knights who charged through that opening were not fools. They were competent soldiers responding to real battle signals. Signals that had been engineered by Subutai to produce exactly that response. The trap did not work despite Hungarian judgment. It worked because of it. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not when you are clearly losing. It is when you believe you have just won. Because the instant you believe you have won, you stop questioning. You stop monitoring what is shifting around you. You begin exploiting the perceived advantage instead of verifying whether the advantage is real. And if someone deliberately placed that feeling of victory inside you, If that "we're winning" signal was fabricated specifically to change your behavior, then you are not chasing a defeated enemy. You are going exactly where the enemy needs you to go. The Sajo River holds not only the bones of an army, it holds the most important lesson any strategist can learn: that premature certainty is the most effective weapon your adversary can use against you. That when everything seems to be going exactly the way you wanted, that is the moment to stop, take a deep breath, and ask the question that no Hungarian knight asked on that April morning: who benefits from me thinking this way? If this video changed how you think about strategy, about what truly decides a battle, not in books, but in reality, the channel has more analyses like this every week. Stories from military history, where understanding the enemy's mind proved more powerful than any army. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one.